On September 6, 2006, 51-year-old Susan Kuhnhausen got off her shift at work and drove a couple miles down to the nearby hair salon where she had an appointment. And she was thinking about changing the color of her hair. This would be a new me sort of thing. It would give her the courage, help work up the courage to do what she knew needed to be done. And while she's sitting in the chair at the salon having her hair done, she's reading a magazine. And in this magazine is a poem by Donna Markova. And two lines really stood out to Susan. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear. You see, Susan had been separated for the last year of an 18-year marriage from her husband, Michael. Now, Susan knew it was time to file for divorce, and Michael did not want to be a part of that. He still loved his wife. Little did Susan know that that poem that she read in that hair salon would change her life forever, only minutes after leaving that hair salon. But before we get into that story, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm your host, Mr. Biggs, coming to you from the great state of Michigan, where it's not called a soda. We call it a pop. We don't say, did you eat yet? We say, did you eat yet? And whenever we want to show somebody where we live, we just merely point at our hand. I'm here to bring you true, scary, mysterious, and sometimes the most outrageous stories ever heard on the World Wide Web. Let's get into it. Now, when Susan arrived home from the hair salon, she walked up her sidewalk, grabbed her keys out of her pocket, unlocked her entry door, walked in. The alarm's going off, but this didn't raise any alarms to Susan because she's the one that set the alarm. She closes her door, she walks over to the alarm pad, and she punches in her code. And as she walks into the kitchen, she looks at the microwave sitting on the counter. Next to the microwave is a note. And it's a note that said, Sue, haven't been sleeping, had to get away, went to the beach. Now, this would be a note from her husband, but this didn't alarm Susan in any way because they were still on pretty decent terms. And when she would have long shifts, she would have her husband go to the house sit, and take care of their cats for her. So this wasn't in any way odd. But what Susan did find odd was when she walked out of the kitchen, she looked down her hallway to her bedroom. That her bedroom door was open. She noticed it was very dark. And this was odd to Susan because Susan had a habit in the morning of getting up, and before she left, she would open all the curtains in her house to let the morning sunlight in. So as Susan's walking down the hallway, she goes into her bedroom, grabs the curtains, opens them, and as she turns to walk back out the bedroom, her heart sank. Because out from behind that bedroom door, a shadowy figure emerged, wearing yellow dishwasher gloves and holding a big hammer. Now, Susan had been preparing for this moment for the last 30 years. She just didn't know it yet. You see, Susan was an ER nurse, and anybody that's ever watched an ER documentary, has a family member that's a nurse or a friend that's a nurse, knows the one ability they have is to stay calm under intense amounts of pressure. And that's exactly what she did. You see, this particular nurse had literally had her hands in people's chest cavities, massaging their heart to keep them alive. She had wrestled down junkies back down to the hospital bed so they could receive treatment when they were going through withdrawals. Her most important weapon, though, wasn't her body, it was her mind. The ability to stay calm under intense amounts of pressure. And that's exactly what she would do. Now, even being calm, cool, and collected, it still triggered her fight or flight response. She had to decide in that moment, do I dart past the bedroom door, down the hallway, into the living room, try to open the entry door outside to freedom, or do I stand and fight? And Susan chose to stand and fight. So at that moment of intense adrenaline dump, the one to where time seems to slow down, and it would be super cool if that was the case, that time really slowed down, but your synapses in your brain are firing at a much higher rate than normal, and your eyes pick up the most tiniest of detail. And that's what happens in an emergency. Susan knew she couldn't make it down the hallway. She had to attack. She had to go after him faster than what he was coming at her. So as she charges him, her goal was to trap his arm by his side to keep him from getting big swings on the hammer. So as she grabs him, she bulldozes him up against the wall, traps his arm, but he still manages to pull it out and start wrapping around the head. He overpowers her, he slams her back up against the other wall, and as he's trying to hit, she gets a sudden surge of strength. She charges him over to the other wall and slams him onto it, and at that point she grabs his throat and she breaks the hammer away from his grip. And he only says 2 words: "You're strong." And as Susan, what she learned from years ago from her dad, that if you ever have to use a hammer for self-defense, it's best to use the claw. And that's exactly what she did. And as she's got him by the throat and she's beating him in the head, she's screaming, "Who are you? What do you want?" And he's not saying anything. He only said, "You're strong." And at this moment, Susan knew. He never asked for jewelry. He never asked for money. He never asked where a safe was. He was there to kill her. And right as she's tightening up the grip on his throat, he's starting to turn blue, and she's smacking him with a hammer. She knows this is her chance to leave. She lets him go, and she goes to dart down the hallway. He comes to enough. He chases after her, and he grabs her shoulder and spins her and hits her right in the face. And he keeps hitting Susan, and she goes down. And as she falls down, she drops the hammer. And he's standing over top of her. He picks up that hammer, and as he's pulling back, Susan knows it's only a matter of time. She's done for. Now, as Susan's laying on her back, almost losing consciousness, if she's going to die, he's going to get caught. So in a sudden surge of strength, he's standing over as he pulls back the hammer. She sits up, grabs his leg, and sucks him in. And she bites. And she bites clean through the clothes. This guy is going to leave evidence everywhere. And as he's screaming and writhing in pain, he's bending over, bites his arm, bites his side, bites his genitals. This guy's going to pay for what he did if he walks out of here. And right then, when Susan pulls him down to the ground, she has the wherewithal about her. She is literally digging through his pockets, throwing whatever she can find all over the house. Leave as much evidence as possible. And when she finally sucks him to the ground, they're in a hallway, okay? They don't have a lot of room to move. She takes her left leg and she throws it over his body, hooks his hip, pulls him into her. Now she's got top control. And she grabs him in the tightest chokehold ever, and she starts to squeeze. And right as he's starting to go limp, his base, that he's on his hands and knees, and as he's getting ready to slump over, she loosens the grip. And she says, "Tell me who sent you, and I'll call you an effing ambulance." He didn't say anything. He just grunted. And with the loosening of that chokehold, he tries to buck her off like he was a bull. And Susan, knowing she might not get a third chance, just continued to squeeze. And right then, he starts slowly going down, slumping over, laying on his stomach to not move again. And right when Susan's sure he's done, she loosens her grip, she gets up, bends over, picks up the hammer, and walks out her front door, down to the neighbors, where the neighbor called 911. And while 911 was on the phone with the neighbor, the 911 dispatcher said, "You're going to have to calm Susan down." The neighbor, she's in the ER and she's already calm. The entire struggle lasted a staggering 14 minutes. It would turn out the attacker was 59-year-old Ed Haffey, and Ed Haffey had a rap sheet as long as your leg. In 1994, he was in prison for 9 years for a murder-for-hire plot. And of all the possessions found at the crime scene was a daily planner belonging to Ed Haffey. And on the September 6th date, it said, "Call Mike." And below that was her husband's phone number. It would turn out Michael had hired Ed Haffey for $50,000 to kill his wife. Because if he couldn't have her, nobody else will. Michael ended up being sentenced to 10 years in prison for the murder-for-hire plot, while Ed, we know where he went, in a hole. Susan would live the next 10 years with her head on a swivel, always worried that if he got out, he was coming to finish the job. But, fortunately for Susan, Michael would die in prison of cancer 3 months before his scheduled release date. Now you know the story of one of the toughest nurses in the world, Susan Kuhnhausen, now known as Susan Walters. The moral of the story? Don't mess with nurses. And for the love of God, whatever you do, you don't mess with Susan. That's it for this story, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed researching it and telling it to you all. Thanks for watching.